A Tall and Small Collection, Season 2, Chapter 32. A Jarring Night. For the past few years, Ashlynn prided herself in resolving issues and conflict amicably. She learned how to take a step back from situations and chose her words carefully to not escalate an issue. There was a time when she was angry and fueled by a sharp tongue and will to inflict wounds on the soul of the one who wronged her. She wasn't always like that, though. She was kind and believed in second chances. However, she had dealt with so much from her last long-term relationship that it changed her. Ashlynn, for the past few years, had found her way back to her kinder self while being ready to defend her loved ones at a moment's notice. That part of her was brought to life when Soren came into her life, both times. Now, however, was not the time for words. In a flash, and acting on pure instinct, Ashlynn snatched the borrower who had Ray's leg moments ago off of the counter and held him tightly away from the counter. All she saw was red, the rage radiating off of her like a furnace. In this moment, it didn't matter that the person fit in her clenched fist. It didn't matter that his face was contorted in sheer panic and terror, tears threatening to spill over the edge of his eyes. He was trying to hurt her family. That was what mattered. Soren, on the other hand, had a million other things running rampant in his mind. First and foremost, his brothers and his daughter. He rushed over and helped Ray up, hugging him instinctively, as he did when Ray was little, before stepping back and evaluating his youngest brother. Ray's lip was split, and there was a bruise on his cheek. The blood on his knuckles was obviously from his assailant. "I'm okay," he muttered bitterly as he wiped his nose on the back of his sleeve. "Good," said Soren, though the tension was failing to dissipate. "And Dorian and Maisie are by the couch. I went over to grab an extra paper clip for my project when he..." Ray stared at the other borrower loathingly as he wriggled in Ashlynn's hand. Ray didn't finish. His eyes were fixated on the borrower's flailing legs. Despite his injuries and the look of seething anger he gave the captured assailant, there was still a flicker of fear as he saw the murderous glare Ashlynn had in her eyes. "Soren, you and Ray should go back to the couch," muttered Ashlynn, as she took a half step away from the counter toward one of the cabinets that Soren knew held jars and writing supplies like pens, paper, and tape. Her voice was dangerously low and threatening. Ray swallowed dryly, but began to obey Ashlynn's words, nervously glancing over his shoulder at her as she continued to restrain his assailant. Soren, on the other hand, remained unmoving on the counter, eyes flicking back and forth from Ashlynn to the assailant. His heart was pounding a million miles a minute. He was feeling panic beyond words, as well as a seething loathing deep in his gut. The loathing came from this scum trying to hurt his brothers. Soren felt his entire body trembling out of fury. Wasn't it enough that he helped attack Soren, leaving him for dead in the freezer? Wasn't it enough that Soren and his family had removed themselves from the borrower community to not only keep the community safe, but also to keep themselves safe? How dare he come back and try and hurt Ray? Were there others hiding in the shadows? This is when Soren's stomach dropped into his gut. Was this part of some scheme? Were there other borrowers here witnessing Ashlynn's fury? Was this going to spread back to the community? More importantly, what was Ashlynn going to do? Soren stared at Ashlynn's hands, his insides twisting. Those were the same hands that had carefully bandaged him numerous times when his leg was busted. Those were the same hands that comforted him when he was reunited with his brothers and he admitted he was at a loss for what to do. Those were the same hands that held him tenderly, protecting him and loving him with fierce and controlled passion. For a moment, he imagined what the other borrower was going through, and it terrified him. In one moment, He was face to face with the horror that so many borrower stories held of being captured and rendered helpless by a human. Soren saw the other borrower's legs kicking as he struggled fruitlessly in Ashlynn's grasp. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the sight even though he wanted to do so. He wanted to look away and pretend he was not about to see something horrific. On the other hand, everything, felt wrong about it. He hated the borrower who came to his home. He loathed him with every fiber of his being. The fact that his family had once again been put in danger by some self-righteous vigilante infuriated him. He was so livid he could inflict any sort of harm on the borrower in Ashlynn's grasp. He also, more than anything, hated seeing this side of Ashlynn. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't right. Soren, trembling from anger and fear, took a bold step forward and shouted as loud as he could. "Ashlynn, don't!" Ashlynn stopped momentarily to glance over at Soren before returning her gaze to the borrower in her grip. She stared at him like a cat would its prey. "Not now, Soren," Ashlynn growled, her voice louder than normal. "Leave him to me." Soren's insides twisted harder. It was evident she was not going to give up easily. "It's not your fight, Ashlynn. Don't do this," pleaded Soren. His eyes glanced up to the trim momentarily, as if he expected to see a dozen peering eyes watching the encounter. He looked back to Ashlynn and breathed deeply. "Please, let him go." Ashlynn whipped around and glared at Soren venomously. Soren, for a fraction of a moment, stepped back, startled by the look in her eye. "Let him go?" she demanded, turning her body to face Soren, though she didn't lower herself to eye level, so she towered over him. "Did you really just say that to me?" "Yes, I did," said Soren firmly, feeling his body trembling ever so slightly with the sight of Ashlynn looming over him, blue-gray eyes illuminated by the kitchen light on the ceiling. She eyed him suspiciously before glancing between the borrower and Soren. As if in defiance, she splayed just a few fingers so the borrower was held by only 2 fingers, keeping the borrower pressed to her palm, and took stock of his supplies. Her eyes fell immediately onto the borrower's hip, and the murderous look returned. She reached out and plucked something off of the borrower's side. "This isn't my fight, huh?" Soren spotted something clutched in her fingers, but didn't recognize it until she lowered it to the counter just in front of Soren. His jaw dropped. It was his hook. It was his father's hook that he had given him before. Soren knelt and grasped the hook in line. It was unmistakable. Soren recognized the partially bent curve and the scrape and notch marks on the spikes. It had been stolen when Soren was thrown into the freezer and his family attacked. "Say that it isn't my fight again," spat Ashlynn. "This is your hook, right? This isn't something you would just loan out. So, this means this pilfering rat took it from you. All I have to do is ask Ray if he recognizes this unwanted house guest and—" "Don't, Ashlynn, please," pleaded Soren, shaking his head free and attaching his hook back onto his hip. "You're right. This was one of the borrowers who attacked us. Still, this isn't right. I'll take care of him." "Sorry, but I'm not letting this one go just so he can go grab his goonies and come back with a vengeance against us," growled Ashlynn. She turned around and, before Soren could stop her, fished out an empty mason jar, unscrewed the top, and dropped the borrower in carelessly, fastening the top before the borrower could get to his feet. He huddled in the corner, obviously terrified, and looked like he was trying to mouth, "Please don't hurt me," or something of the kind. Soren watched in horror as Ashlynn brought the glass jar over and set it onto the counter, inches from the electrical cover, which led to the borrower's freedom. It was obvious he was scrambling to find something to help him get out of the jar. but it wasn't until he caught Soren's eyes that he stopped moving and drew himself in tight. Soren felt acid burning in the back of his throat. He wanted to upchuck everything and excuse himself to bed, ignoring the issue and letting Ashlynn deal with it. Still, he knew this was wrong. Despite what the borrower deserved, it should be dealt with by him. He swallowed dryly and looked back at Ashlynn, who was still glowering at the borrower in the jar. "Ashlynn, this isn't right. Please let him out," said Soren. "No. Ashlynn, this isn't good. Think about this for a second," implored Soren. "Think? You're saying I'm being rash?" demanded Ashlynn, turning that still seething gaze onto Soren momentarily. "He and some of his goons tried to kill you. Do you get that? Kill you. They put you in the freezer, and I don't even want to think about what might have happened if they managed to get a hold of Dorian or Ray or Maisie." "Yes, me. He and his goons went after me, not you," argued Soren. "Ashlynn, we can take care of ourselves. You don't have to step in and protect us. We're in this together." He knew this was an uphill battle, and that he could only spill everything on his mind in an effort to persuade Ashlynn. "Exactly. Together. We are family, Soren. And that means if he went after one of us, he went after all of us," Ashlynn argued back. This time, she knelt and rested at eye level with Soren. "And I love you for that," said Soren firmly, taking a few shaky but daring steps forward toward Ashlynn. "Family also means we trust one another, and I'm telling you to trust me to handle this." "You think I'm going to leave you alone with this guy? You think I'm just going to let him go so he can go and spread the word that his plan was foiled?" demanded Ashlynn. "Ashlynn, we are shattering what little trust we've earned with the borrower community by trapping him like this," said Soren fiercely as he pointed to the mason jar. "He's going to go back and tell everyone that you're just like all of the other humans out there, confirming their stories and suspicions. They might be watching right now." Ashlynn's features hardened. Her jaw clenched and, for a moment, it looked like she considered Soren's words. Her eyes quickly darted to the electrical cover, and then above to the trim. "Ashlynn," said Soren, stepping forward again. "Please, let him go. Let me handle this. Yes, this is our fight as a family, but I need to be the one to throw the punches. Please," pleaded Soren. Ashlynn thought about Soren's words for several long minutes. She could see the fear in his hazel eyes, as well as the determined look in his features. He did not want to see this borrower come to harm, but he obviously didn't want him to go unpunished either. With a clenched jaw, she reached past Soren and seized the jar, standing up as she did. For a moment, Soren's mouth opened in protest, as though he lost his uphill battle with her. Before he could say anything, Ashlynn unscrewed the lid and forcefully tapped it against her palm, forcing the borrower out onto her hand once more. Ashlynn kept her fist light, but also kept a firm grip around the borrower as he whimpered in her grasp. She brought him up to eye level and made sure his eyes locked onto hers before she spoke. "You listen up, and you listen well. The only reason you are walking away from this little encounter is because he is allowing it." Ashlynn pointed to Soren and made sure the borrower saw Soren as well. "I am not so gracious and forgiving as him, and, if it were solely up to me, you would live in that jar for the rest of your days. Get it? Soren, the one you and your lunatic friends tried to kill, is the one letting you go. Think about that really hard for a minute." Ashlynn let an entire minute pass before giving the borrower one more squeeze. "If I ever see you or any of your friends here again, or if any of them turn up hurt again, I will do whatever it takes to find you and make sure you regret your actions against my family," growled Ashlynn. With that, She quickly dropped her hand and carelessly dropped the borrower onto the counter. He landed on his hands and knees mere inches from Soren. He stayed there completely stock still, like a statue, before Soren stepped forward.
"Get up,"
Soren spat.
"You chose to pick a fight with me, and now you'll have it. It wasn't a fair fight before with the three of you, but I'm ready now. To be honest, a fight between just the two of us is hardly fair. You'd need some more guys on your side to make it even. Still, you'll do."
The other borrower merely whimpered and cowered, still not willing to move, with Ashlynn less than 8 inches away.
"What?"
demanded Soren.
"Not willing to get into a fair fight?"
The borrower pushed himself up, obviously shaking, and glared up at Soren.
"Big words for a human pet,"
he snarled, keeping his voice low so Ashlynn couldn't quite make out what he was saying.
"That human will snatch me the moment I make a move."
"No, she won't. I told you, it's not like that," snapped Soren as he stepped back into a defensive position.
"I can't change your mind, but I can change that grimace on your face."
"Traitor! You're no borrower!" roared the perpetrator as he lunged forward, fists clenched. Soren dodged easily to the side and spun on his heel, grabbing the borrower's arm, spinning around and throwing him onto the ground. Soren managed to leap out of the way before the perpetrator snagged his legs. He scrambled to his feet and threw punch after punch wildly, trying to land any hit he could on Soren. Soren, on the other hand, was too quick. He dodged blow after blow until he spotted an opening and landed 3 harsh punches to his assailant's jaw, gut, and chin. The borrower landed harshly on the ground, obviously out cold, before coming back to consciousness a minute later. Soren hovered over him, fists still clenched. The borrower scrambled away several inches as Soren watched him. Then, as Soren stood with Ashlynn to his back, growled, "Get out, and do not come back. I can't guarantee your safety or the safety of your goons next time." Bloodied and bruised, the borrower hastened to his feet and stumbled toward the electrical cover, vanishing from sight moments later. Ashlynn said nothing for several minutes, but it was Soren who broke the silence first.
"Thank you, Ashlynn,"
he muttered, as Ashlynn laid her hand palm up on the counter. "Did we do the right thing?" she asked quietly, as Soren stepped onto her palm. "Letting him go so he could go and tell everyone?"
"No point in worrying now,"
stated Soren as he glanced down at his knuckles.
"We've pretty much removed ourselves from the community, so it could go one of 2 ways. One being he spreads the story and everyone is terrified, but will leave us alone. 2 being he keeps this embarrassing story of attacking a teen and getting jarred to himself, and everyone is still terrified, if only a little less."
Soren, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lose my temper like that. Ashlynn leaned her back against the counter and kept Soren cupped in her palm. He gazed up at her stormy blue-gray eyes and saw moisture gathering in them.
"It's okay. You listened and took a step back, which is what's important. You let me handle this," said Soren.
Taking a daring move, he got a partial running start and ran up past Ashlynn's arm, scurrying up the rest of the way using the fabric off her jacket, and rested once he made it to the top of her shoulder. Instinctively, Ashlynn turned her head just as Soren approached and kissed her cheek, which was twice the width of his own body. Ashlynn closed her eyes and let herself feel the gentle kiss Soren gave her. After a moment, she reached up and grasped Soren delicately. She thought she felt him shudder in her grasp, but it was only natural, seeing that she held him in the same hand she seized the perpetrator with minutes earlier. She held him aloft and pressed her lips to his chest, which seemed to relax the tension in his body. It was that kiss, for Ashlynn, that helped save their wonderful date night. That, and the fact that the boys and Maisie were completely safe after their little encounter. Ashlynn bit her lip in frustration as she stared at the ceiling that night, after they all had turned in for bed. Had she just ruined something great with the borrower community? Had something been damaged with her and Soren's relationship by the way she acted? She didn't think so. Still, she hoped that borrower would keep his mouth shut about what happened tonight. Could she be so lucky? And, if not, would there be any way to redeem her actions in the eyes of the community?